My talk is about women in the Netherlands during the Holocaust, the victims, the perpetrators, the bystanders, the resistance fighters, and the rescuers. We have heard a lot already. I would say not everyone remained anonymous and unknown or unmentioned. Among the women who received recognition in the first 10 years after the liberation, I would like to mention a few. Of the Jewish women who wrote and found a voice are, of course, first of all, Anne Frank. She was murdered in Bergen-Belsen together with her sister Margot, and so Anne Frank's voice has come to us from her diary that was published with edits made by her father Otto and with his permission and on recommendation of Annie Romein, a well-known Dutch non-Jewish writer, and her husband Jan Romein, a non-Jewish progressive historian. Anne Frank, of course, herself was murdered. She was no longer there. Similarly, we have the memory of Hannie Schaft, a female resistance fighter who was active in Haarlem in communist circles of armed resistance work. Hannie Schaft, known as the girl with red hair, was arrested and condemned to capital punishment. She was shot, and there is an impressive commemoration of her life and work in Haarlem, a city near Amsterdam, every year. The third woman I want to mention is Helena Theodora Kuipers-Rietberg, who was recognized early as a resistance fighter and as the leader of a large organization, LOLKP. Aunt Riek, Tante Riek as she was known, worked for a long time under the radar, unsuspected by the Nazis as a mother of 5 children and a very dedicated Protestant Christian. However, in the fall of 1944 she went into hiding herself as her life in Winterswijk, near the German border, became too dangerous. Together with her husband she found safe spaces for their children, and then they went to Bennekom to hide themselves. However, a courier on his way to them to send them messages was betrayed by a woman. I have not found her name yet, and the couple were arrested and brought to Vught concentration camp. There she took all responsibility upon herself for her actions, and then she was deported to Ravensbrück camp near Berlin. There she died of typhoid fever and pneumonia in the days after Christmas 1944. The very first monument to recognize the work of the resistance helping people in hiding was dedicated to her, and it was unveiled in 1946 in the town of Winterswijk where she lived. The monument is that of a woman caring for a lamb, a small sheep. After these first post-war recognitions, it would take a really long time before more attention came for women in the resistance. So there is a first phase of some recognition for some, most of them who are killed or died. And then there is a period of long period of silence. Silence among historians that has remained intact for at least 30 years. In the 1970s, young female history students and some faculty began to write about women in the resistance again. On the other side of the spectrum, from resistance to collaboration, are the female collaborators who were working in support of Nazi Germany. There were Dutch Nazi women's organizations and schools, but here I only want to mention one woman, the only woman who received capital punishment, and the only Jewish woman too. Her name was Ans van Dijk. It is a very tragic story. Ans van Dijk worked in a shop in Amsterdam selling hats to women in the city center. She knew many people from the Jewish community. She went into hiding herself, and she was betrayed and arrested by Dutch Nazis in her hiding place in the Marco Polo Street in Amsterdam-West. Ans van Dijk was then given a choice by the group of so-called Jew hunters. Either she would be deported with her family, or she would cooperate with the Nazis. She chose the latter. Together with 2 other women, she joined the group of Jew hunters, and she betrayed many Jewish men and women. For this she was arrested and condemned to death in 1947, and she was indeed put to death in 1948. So this is a very a terrible story. I want to talk a little bit about silence. silence in historical research and also in oral history research, silences are an important topic of study. The length and persistence and the type of silence can be very significant. Lindsay French and Alexander Freund have shown us that silences in oral history can have very different backgrounds. They say silences may express, sorry for the dog, I don't know if you can hear him.
Oh.
Silences are a constitutive part of oral history interviews. Silences may express individual or collective forgetting, collaborative remembering, discomfort, reluctance, self-censorship, non-compliance, confrontation, politeness, fear, anger, deceit, taboos, secrets, contemplation, concern for the other, reflection, conformity, or that which need not to be told. And silences can occur from the start of a research project onwards, or it can develop later. I spoke with Denise Citroen, the organizer of the Survivors of the Shoah Foundation from Los Angeles, who interviewed a few thousand Jewish survivors in the Netherlands. She was responsible for the project in the Netherlands. Denise Citroen remembered that it took a while for Jewish survivors of hiding to agree to be interviewed in the project. She noticed that while survivors of the concentration camps were coming to the project quicker and easier, it was not the case with the survivors of hiding. They needed confirmation that their story was worthwhile and that they were welcome to be interviewed too, Citroen told me. As far as I know, there was in the Netherlands no shortage of Jewish women survivors prepared to be interviewed in the 1990s. All these recordings are now available for study. I have heard that in Poland, by Marta Kobel-Tokarska, it was more difficult to find people willing to be interviewed. But I will talk about the Netherlands now. So we find different silences related to hiding histories in the Netherlands in a recent study of groups of non-Jews, mostly students, this is the book, who brought Jewish babies and young children to hiding places. And the silence of helpers and the silence about female helpers was noted by Professor of Criminology at Leiden University, Jan van Dijk, who wrote this book. He set out to study the resistance group that his late aunt, Iet van Dijk, had been active in. This was the same student resistance group that Anna spoke about with Piet Meerburg, and she was one of the girls. She was a medical student. And this very active student group, as we have heard, built a network with other groups in various parts of the country, and they managed to bring hundreds of Jewish children to hiding places. In a letter to her parents in June 1945, one of the very few direct sources for Iet van Dijk's own voice, she writes that together with 7 other helpers, they saved around 350 Jewish babies and young children in hiding. Several histories of this network have now been written, but nothing was found or mentioned about Iet van Dijk until her cousin set out to write about her. He notes that the memories of some of the young men involved in these networks had been recorded, but much less attention was there for the women active in rescue work. So there was a division of labor in the group, as we heard, and the activists in these resistance groups have remained silent about their resistance activities after the liberation. But they did stay in touch with each other. They remained very good friends. Some of them married each other. Somehow they only spoke about their activities amongst themselves, not with anyone outside these former resistance group circles. Jan van Dijk, the writer, explains that traumatization of the helpers was a factor here too. Several women and men directly involved in helping Jewish children in hiding declared that for decades afterwards they were haunted by the memories, not about the children they had saved, but about one or many others they were not able to help. Johan van Hulst, a school director and directly involved in saving many Jewish children in Amsterdam, who remained silent about this for decades as well, said about this in 2015, when he was already 104 years old. He said, and I quote, "Actually, I only think about what I was not able to do, about the few thousand children I have not been able to save." Unquote. Iet van Dijk continued her medical studies and became a pediatrician in Indonesia, caring for children her whole post-war life, and she was never interviewed about her wartime activities. She died in 1973, a time when the value of oral history had not yet been acknowledged. A little bit about my current research project, Mapping Hiding Places. I've started that from the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam, and I've found that documentation about hiding can be found in many different sources. I would recommend you to look for questionnaires, pre-interview questionnaires. Often organizations have questionnaires that they save, and they contain a lot of information. So this is what we have used now for our Hiding Places project. The pre-interview questionnaires from the Shoah Foundation, but also those from the Hidden Child Foundation. And I make data sets of these things. And a third data set we made was a project about a Jewish school during the Holocaust, the Jewish Lyceum in Amsterdam. I wrote a book about this school, and it has just been republished in a completely new edition. The school existed only 2 years, but I was able to write about all the survivors and what happened to them, thanks to a lot of new digital sources that we have now. A general thing we have to keep in mind, and Jan mentioned that at the beginning, is the structural invisibility of women in this period. And in the Netherlands, that period would continue to at least 1957. Women did not exist administratively in many areas of life. The French sociologist Sarah Gainsbourger showed this recently, for example, in all the rental agreements she studied of Jews in Paris. All the rental agreements were in the name of the husband. After the war, many men had died, and women did not automatically have the authorization to act. They needed to go to a judge first to get the authorization to act. And in the Netherlands, women did not have that authority until 1957. To finish, I would like to tell you that we now know much more about resistance groups and the women active in them or leading them. Lauma Zirel is an example. Jacoba van Tongeren is an example. Gesine van der Molen. The Criterion women that we have heard about from Anna. And the women in the Vrije Groepen Amsterdam. And there are many, many more. So we are beginning to do this much needed work and finding more and more. There is also recent documentation work. Mart van der Wiel has now collected more than 1,600 names of women in resistance in the province of North Holland. That is a province around Amsterdam. And several new publications can be found about that. Also about women in the Frisian resistance in the north of the country have come out recently. And I am the co-promoter of a new PhD thesis. Rianne van Oosterom, as a journalist, is now working on a PhD thesis about women in the Dutch Protestant Christian resistance group around a daily newspaper called Trouw. And Rianne van Oosterom first published extensively in that newspaper Trouw already, and she has now built a database and made many interviews. She found 140 ego documents in which women tell us themselves about their activities in resistance. For this, she had to go into the families. Many memories are still in the families of the women involved. Van Oosterom speaks of silencing, but also of self-silencing. And this has lasted a long time. But times have changed. The silence has now been broken, and there are new initiatives to study women in wartime Netherlands in a more inclusive way, says Van Oosterom. And she adds, and I quote, "Women have been indispensable for the infrastructure of the resistance. Without them, there were no places to sleep. There was no working network in which people in hiding were helped. There were no safe connections between resistance workers. There were no newspaper deliveries, no in detailed prepared resistance attacks, and so on." Thank you. That is what I wanted to tell you.